So good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Really excited to speak with each of you today. Really excited because a lot of times I get asked around what specifically are healthcare organizations doing in the world of really unlocking data. And we all know that the public cloud organizations out there, such as Google, have these amazing capabilities around artificial intelligence discoveries, really leveraging the Google Healthcare API. And with me today, I'm really grateful to be joined by Alan, who I'll let take over here for a moment. But just from a agenda perspective, we're going to have both myself, Matt Ferrari, the CTO of ClearDATA, as well as Alan, the Director of Engineering from CareCloud, really speak to how to unlock some of these challenges that healthcare organizations are finding to really get insights out of their data. So Alan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Matt. So hi, my name is Alan Pulido, and I am a Director of Engineering at CareCloud, like Matt mentioned. So currently I am in charge of the financial architecture and development of the CareCloud platform. But however, specifically today, we're going to be focused on our patented ANSI X12 EDI processing engine. So if we can move to the next slide, I'll give you a bit of background on what CareCloud is and does. So we are a cloud-based provider of healthcare IT software. We're currently focused on the ambulatory side of electronic medical records and practice management. However, we also extend into patient experience with the Breeze platform, which can be found in any of the app stores. The design behind CareCloud and its systems, it's to enable a modern user experience while at the same time providing a very powerful underlying web service technology, which is very simple to use and intuitive. And one thing that I can say is that we have won many awards for all our works. So moving on, I think we can all agree that we're facing a brand new challenge in the healthcare industry. And looking back at 2020 and what has transpired last year, we can say that it's a transitional period for our industry in terms of interoperability and all its practical applications. And one thing that I can say is that we're all feeling the burden financially as well as technologically of having to bring up our systems to be able to comply with the new FHIR standards and all the other standards that are coming out. So here at CareCloud, we believe that the challenge is twofold, right? So one is how do we expose and migrate all our existing data to use these new standards? And two, how do we update our processes and our APIs to, from the get-go, already save the data in the new formats so we can expose it for interoperability purposes. So on the next slide, what you can see that what we have done at CareCloud is that we have moved all our processes that can rely on this internal data users to do so. And as we look to integrate with new partners, already having our data in FHIR or being able to translate it to FHIR real time was a big win for us last year. Next, we can see the platform that we have created, and specifically we're talking about what we call internally the Edison platform. And we use this every day for all our incremental EDI transactions that inbound and outbound coming from payers and clearinghouses. And what we do here is that we're translating all those EDI transactions into our native JSON format, or also even translating them or receiving them directly in the FHIR format that we can later use for interoperability purposes with our trading partners. We believe really that the power of this solution lies in its flexibility, because any partner of ours can now incrementally update their system to comply with the new standards without having to incur the upfront cost of having to develop just to be able to support certain FHIR transactions. In the next slide, you will see how we were able to tackle this, and what allowed us to accelerate the work with something of this magnitude is our ability to work with the Google Cloud team that was spearheading the healthcare API. And what you have seen now is that many other cloud providers are making a similar move. However, we know that just having a FHIR API as a service, that's just half the battle. The real work is in building and maintaining this infrastructure, which is, for the most part, a cost-prohibitive endeavor for most organizations. And even, I would say strategically, the healthcare industry, we don't want to get into a place where we're building the same redundant infrastructure over and over again, as well as maintaining compliance as the FHIR standard evolves over time. So next, we can see the architecture of the platform that we have created. And all the issues that I have just talked about is what led us to this final process that we have today, where we're interfacing with the Google Cloud infrastructure as a service, and where we're talking about deploying all this distributed architecture. This is where our partnership with ClearDATA really begins to shine. Because the question here for us is, how do we, as an organization, guarantee that this elastic infrastructure and services are being created to solve all these problems in a generic way, are being developed and deployed in a compliant and secure manner? And Matt will talk a little bit about, actually a lot on how that happens a bit later on. But our focus, and however, is what Matt mentioned, is the data, right? This is we're talking here about some of the most sensitive data as patients are concerned. I mean, we're taking care of all their financial and clinical information, which encompasses their insurance enrollment, their eligibility, and even their claims. So needless to say, all this needs to be guaranteed in transit and addressed as it moves between the different areas of the architecture. So what we have done is that we have adopted an all-in GCP data architecture, where we're taking advantage of Kubernetes for deploying and scaling the containers. Also, we're using a lot of the native data ingestion tools to prep the data and load it across to ultimately save it in Google's healthcare API. Now, downstream from there, now that this data is saved in an interoperable way using the FHIR standard, now this lends its uses to many other interesting opportunities where we can use this data to run machine learning, anomaly detection, and even big data analytics with BigQuery. So in conclusion, we believe that the two-way partnership with Google on the healthcare API side and ClearDATA on the compliance side really let us put together a turnkey stack that allows us internally and our partners to potentially leverage the type of technology that you could deploy at the push of a button. And I will now pass it on to Matt.
Excellent. Thank you, Alan. It's always great to hear from customers that are really doing really cutting edge things with data and AI. I've been fortunate enough to work with CareCloud now for many years, and the progress is amazing. And Alan said it beautifully. The way that CareCloud simplifies their interactions on the front end is really humbling. You know, I've personally used the platform, and it's just an amazing thing to witness. To Alan's point, switching gears a bit, ClearDATA has, of course, a focus on security, compliance, and privacy. And in this kind of Google example, I really wanted to show how we do it. And so working with Google and working with CareCloud, we focus on what's called automated safeguards. And what you see on the screen here is kind of a high-level overview of what that looks like. But picture, we focus on covering a large amount of standards. So you can see that on the left, right? It's HIPAA, it's ISO, it's NIST, it's things like that. And we need to interpret those. HIPAA, as in an example, for example, was built in 1996, as we all know, when we fill out all those papers. And CareCloud, by the way, is one of those organizations that simplifies a lot of that. But as we fill that out, we know that these regulations were actually built well before things like GCP existed. And so in order to actually understand those, we have to break those down into individual CFRs, or Code of Federal Regulations, and then on an automation or a software development side, break them into technical controls. What specifically needs to happen to keep this environment compliant throughout the life cycle of PII or PHI existing in the environment? And look, each cloud service has different controls, right? So it's got to be configured in a specific way to keep it HIPAA eligible. And for those of you who are already using public cloud services, it's pretty easy to read a HIPAA white paper or a blueprint and be able to provision compliant services. But how do you keep it compliant when you're struggling with the velocity of change inside of GCP as new features are released and bugs and new services altogether are released? When you're combining that with changes in regulation that occur, you think about some of the ongoing changes for things like GDPR, and then on top of that, change management inside of your app. Alan just spoke really well to how the architecture works, but constantly there's going to be changes in evolution as you want to bring new services on. So how does all that map? And so ClearDATA has built automation called automated safeguards to really focus on keeping those things compliant. ClearDATA has over 135 technical controls across 40, actually more than 45 now, public cloud services, where we are interpreting these technical regulations and standards, breaking them into technical controls, and then keeping them automated to keep CareCloud and others safe. As we think about how that looks back to the user, what you can see here is really a focus on seeing the individual regulation and then ClearDATA's interpretation of it to try to take that compliance safeguarding to the nth degree. And that's become very important for a lot of healthcare organizations that are trying to adopt public cloud services. All of this kind of maps back into how we think about public cloud adoption in general. CareCloud has been on the forefront of innovation through automation, and ClearDATA works with CareCloud and GCP to be able to automate remediation so that when a service or a application, or heaven forbid, some kind of PHI falls out of compliance, ClearDATA is able to leverage the public cloud tools and our own intellectual property to identify the deviation from the state of compliance, automatically remediate that, and then show it in a kind of red, yellow, green dashboard that's near real time, so that when you have a third-party audit from somebody, either like at the Office of Civil Rights, for example, you can show without a shadow of a doubt that I am compliant throughout this. All of that allows you to focus on your core business, right? Which should be probably innovating either, patient care or clinical care or clinical trials or whatever you are doing. The amazing thing about working with someone like CareCloud is these folks are constantly innovating, and their innovation, I hope, is enabled by being able to leverage some of the public cloud services and feel confident that they are compliant throughout the utilization of those. As you think about the architecture for ClearDATA's Comply platform, which is that kind of compliance automation layer, you should be thinking about being able to take a look at multiple different facets of the environment itself. So if you just think about the right-hand side, you're thinking about all of the different things that we are focusing on automating from the Google Cloud perspective. There's tremendous amount of services from Google Cloud's perspective. They're constantly releasing more. They're putting some of the existing ones behind what's known as HIPAA eligibility, and ultimately their business associates agreement, or their BAA. ClearData's got to build out automated safeguards and remediation for all of that. I'm going to show a couple of examples of what those look like in a couple slides. But sometimes things can't be automated, right? Sometimes it might be operating system changes. It might be a new nurse joins a practice and needs a VPN user set up, these kind of things. And sure, over time, we want to automate more of that stuff, but you definitely want managed services and experts behind that. So ClearData has a combination of this software that does this automation, along with people that are certified inside of Google Cloud and have an unfair advantage. And that unfair advantage is we have the opportunity of serving hundreds of customers that deal with PHI or PII every single day. And so we have a lot of healthcare 24/7 experts that really understand how to safeguard your data inside of the public cloud. All of this is done in natively. So if you think about the technology itself as it relates to GCP, we are not, there's no shim, there's no API between you and Google. You're using Google's API directly. And in the case of this conversation, CareCloud certainly spoke beautifully to the Google Healthcare API. We allow that and then interrogate deviations from the state of compliance outside in, so that you're getting near real-time remediation in an automated way without without having your dev team have to learn yet another API, yet another development language. I mentioned the dashboard earlier. Picture auditable truth or auditable proof, I guess would be the better term, for how I can see red, yellow, green. How am I doing from a state of compliance at the individual GCE layer or GKE layer if you're a Kubernetes individual or a Kubernetes organization, and all the way up to the application where you can bundle and roll up individual resources into kind of an application. So you can see that, yes, my critical care app is performing well, and you can see that over time. You can run reports that you can show to third-party auditors, or you can even have this displayed, kind of almost like a security operations center dashboard, except for compliance inside of your own facility as you take a look at your state of compliance and how you can build a culture of compliance as you grow the organization. I wanted to show, very similar to how Alan described the architecture, I wanted to show very similar architecture around how ClearData does this, right? And so this is an example of GCS specifically on top of Google, where we are securely accessing these, these GCS buckets. We are then running various controls to do things like ensuring that we have logging for compliance, enabling versioning so that we can have rollback access control and things like that, and removing any public access. And sure, we would all say there's probably very few applications in healthcare that have PHI that are having public access, but the truth is that oftentimes mistakes are made, right? Change management happens. Organizations that have things like ITIL oftentimes can unencrypt by accident, or open the wrong security group, or have the wrong port publicly accessible. And ClearData has built all this automation around that. And then finally, securely backing up the environment from the versioning to the storage bucket, the logging, everything, to make sure that there's traceability as you go through an audit. And then finally, allowing that customer to securely access those assets that are behind the safeguards, right? Enabling things like identity and access management, enabling the ability to have two-factor authentication, all those things that are really critical as you think about PHI inside of the public cloud. Another example is GKE. GKE is certainly one of the fastest growing services that ClearData sees out there in the market. And actually Alan mentioned it quite a bit as well. And this is just another example of ClearData's automation, where we're doing things like hardening the cluster and deploying third-party technology like Twistlock to do vulnerability scanning between cluster nodes to kind of take that level of compliance to the nth degree. And a kind of another example of ultimately how we build out hardened clusters. And when I say hardened clusters, that means that we are taking a look at standards like NIST and making sure that they are constantly hardened from a compliance perspective, so that whether you're deploying a Kubernetes asset or you're deploying something like GCE, those operating systems are hardened and compliant with the latest standards, and also taking into account any recent vulnerabilities that may have been inside of the environment. ClearDATA has the ability through automation to actually patch zero-day vulnerabilities and then deploy new Kubernetes environments or new hardened operating systems in the GCE world in a kind of a zero-day mentality. You know, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up one final architecture slide specifically for GCP project and GCE. Certainly, lots of healthcare organizations are still using operating systems out there. In this specific scenario, we are providing hardened images, which are updated on, they can be updated daily actually, and provide persistent disk snapshots with backups, do all the normal logging, and then deploying deep security, specifically with third parties like Trend Micro Deep Security. And then continuing to monitor this platform in an ongoing way. So if there's any kind of, let's say, IDS or intrusion detection that's going on inside of the environment, ClearDATA can immediately respond, remediate, or heaven forbid, investigate if there is any kind of security incident within the secure environment. This is just a quick snapshot of all of the services that are currently covered within inside of the Google Cloud Platform environment from an automated safeguard perspective. As you can see here, 17, and by the way, more are in progress right now. ClearDATA launches more and more every single quarter. As you can see here, there's kind of the pre-Q3, Q3, and then Q4 of 2019. There's more coming out actually presently. And behind those, there's 54 controls enforced. You think back to that very first architecture slide, those technical controls that safeguard the environment each and every day. So if you think about cloud storage, there's multiple technical controls behind cloud storage to keep cloud storage specifically encrypted and access limited. Finally, you think about leveraging the public cloud from a BAA perspective. The Business Associates Agreement is incredibly important if you are processing, transmitting, or storing PHI or PII, and many organizations negotiate and sign BAAs with the public cloud providers. But ClearDATA is a little bit different in that we also work with organizations to help them sign a BAA with ClearDATA, which also has a BAA already in place with Google. In this specific example that you see here on the screen, we are covering a lot more, right? Because we're adding all of those automation and value-added services on top, from managed services to identity and access management, to making sure that encryption is always enforced in every part of the environment, not just the encryption at rest storage component, and really taking on more of that responsibility from a BAA perspective has been absolutely critical for healthcare organizations that may not be able to get a BAA done with the public cloud organization, or even if they can, maybe they want a little bit more coverage than just the underlying physical infrastructure. Finally, our overview marketing slide, if you will. These are some of the customers that we are privileged to serve. CareCloud being just absolutely one of the pleasures for myself and our organization to work with. But we serve 4 segments within the healthcare market, from provider, life sciences, healthcare technology, and payer, working across the spectrum of patient care, clinical applications, consumer mobile, and really lots of transformative things. So much like Alan walked through, we work with a lot of healthcare organizations that are already in public cloud, and they're rebuilding into more cognitive services, more ML services, more big data and PaaS services. And then we also work with organizations that are still dipping their toe in public cloud, and they're using technologies that are more aligned with GCE as they lift and shift, and then hopefully refactor into cloud native services and optimize over time. And so we have the privilege of working with both parts of the market. Finally, just wanted to say thank you. Really grateful that you've taken the time to listen to us today, and very grateful to be joined by Alan and the CareCloud team. Thank you all for the time.